In the late 20th century, Cambodia was a nation caught in the crossfire of global Cold War politics and internal turmoil. At the heart of its darkest chapter was a man named Salah Sarlater, known as Pol Pot. His rise to power was fueled by a vision of an agrarian utopia, but it would soon become one of the most brutal regimes in modern history. During the early 1970s, Cambodia was destabilized by the Vietnam War spillover and the ongoing civil war between the U.S.-backed Lon Nol government and the communist Khmer Rouge forces. The Khmer Rouge, led by Pol Pot, gained momentum by exploiting the suffering of rural Cambodians, who had been devastated by American bombings and economic hardship. On April 17, 1975, the Khmer Rouge marched into Phnom Penh, marking the beginning of a radical social experiment. The city's population celebrated, believing that the war had ended. However, within hours, the new regime ordered the complete evacuation of all cities. Millions were forced into the countryside, walking for days without food or water. Pol Pot's vision was clear. He sought to erase all remnants of modern society, intellectualism, and foreign influence. Cambodia was renamed Democratic Kampuchea, and a new era of terror began. The Khmer Rouge abolished money, education, religion, and personal freedoms. People were assigned to collective farms, where backbreaking labor and starvation became the norm. Those who opposed or were deemed enemies of the revolution were swiftly executed. The intellectuals, former government officials, and even those who simply wore glasses considered a sign of Western influence were targeted. By the end of 1975, Pol Pot had consolidated power, turning Cambodia into an isolated dystopian state. The ideology of Year Zero had begun, where history was erased, and society was forced to start anew under the Khmer Rouge's extreme communist doctrine. But the worst was yet to come. As Cambodia entered the late 1970s, Pol Pot's vision of an agrarian utopia spiraled into one of the most horrifying genocides in modern history. Under the Khmer Rouge's rule, the country became a vast labor camp, where survival depended on absolute obedience, physical endurance, and luck. By 1976, the regime had implemented extreme policies to purge the nation of any perceived enemies. Pol Pot's obsession with eliminating traitors led to widespread paranoia within his own government. Even high-ranking Khmer Rouge officials were not safe from accusations of betrayal. The infamous S-21 prison, Tuol Sleng, became the epicenter of systematic torture and execution. Thousands of Cambodians, many of whom were innocent, were brutally interrogated, forced to confess to fabricated crimes, and then sent to their deaths. Meanwhile, the people suffered unimaginable hardships. Families were torn apart, and children were indoctrinated to spy on their parents. Basic human rights ceased to exist. Food was scarce, with rations reduced to mere spoonfuls of rice per day. Starvation and disease spread rapidly, yet speaking out meant execution. The population lived in constant fear, knowing that even a whispered complaint could result in being taken away in the night. The killing fields' vast execution sites scattered across Cambodia became symbols of the regime's cruelty. Victims, blindfolded and bound, were led to mass graves where they were beaten to death with farming tools to save bullets. It is estimated that between 1.5 to 2 million people, nearly a quarter of Cambodia's population, perished from starvation, overwork, and execution. Despite the regime's efforts to isolate the country from the outside world, reports of atrocities began to leak. Neighboring Vietnam, once an ally of the Khmer Rouge, grew increasingly alarmed by border clashes and the suffering of Cambodian refugees fleeing into its territory. By 1978, tensions between the two nations reached a boiling point, setting the stage for Pol Pot's downfall. By late 1978, the Khmer Rouge's reign of terror was crumbling. Pol Pot's extreme policies had devastated Cambodia, and his increasing paranoia led to the purging of even his most loyal followers. Meanwhile, Tensions with Vietnam escalated as Khmer Rouge forces repeatedly launched deadly raids across the border, massacring Vietnamese civilians. The Vietnamese government, no longer willing to tolerate Pol Pot's aggression, prepared for a full-scale invasion. On January 7, 1979, the Vietnamese army, alongside Cambodian defectors, stormed Phnom Penh. The Khmer Rouge forces collapsed almost instantly, unable to match Vietnam's military strength. Pol Pot and his inner circle fled to the jungles near the Thai border, leaving behind a shattered nation. For the first time in nearly 4 years, the people of Cambodia saw hope, but the scars of genocide ran deep. The horrors of the Khmer Rouge era slowly came to light as mass graves were uncovered across the country. Survivors, emaciated and traumatized, told stories of unspeakable cruelty. Cambodia was in ruins, its cities deserted, its economy non-existent, and millions of its people dead. Despite his downfall, Pol Pot remained a fugitive, leading a weakened Khmer Rouge insurgency from remote jungle hideouts throughout the 1980s and 1990s. His influence waned as the world condemned his crimes, and former allies abandoned him. In 1997, he was arrested by his own followers, who had grown disillusioned with his leadership. A year later, on April 15, 1998, Pol Pot died in mysterious circumstances, officially of a heart attack, though some suspect he was poisoned to prevent his capture and trial. The legacy of Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge remains a haunting chapter in world history. Cambodia continues to rebuild, but the memories of the killing fields, the torture chambers, and the lost generations linger. The world vowed never to let such atrocities happen again, yet history has often shown otherwise. The dark past of Cambodia serves as a reminder of how ideology, unchecked power, and extremism can lead to unthinkable human suffering. As Cambodia emerged from the horrors of the Khmer Rouge era, the nation faced the daunting task of rebuilding itself from the ashes. The fall of Pol Pot in 1979 ended one of the most brutal regimes of the 20th century, but justice for the millions of victims remained elusive. The Khmer Rouge had left behind a country in ruins, its economy shattered, its intellectual class decimated, and its people deeply traumatized. Throughout the 1980s, Cambodia remained under Vietnamese control, with a government led by former Khmer Rouge defectors. The world was divided. Many Western nations, including the United States, refused to recognize the new regime, instead continuing to support Khmer Rouge representatives in the United Nations as part of Cold War politics. This further delayed efforts to bring Khmer Rouge leaders to justice. Meanwhile, Pol Pot and his remaining forces operated from jungle hideouts near the Thai border, waging a low-level insurgency. For years, they carried out guerrilla attacks, funded by smuggling and foreign aid. It was not until the 1990s, after the end of the Cold War, and a peace agreement brokered by the United Nations in 1991, that Cambodia took its first real steps toward peace and stability. The Khmer Rouge Tribunal, officially known as the Extraordinary Chambers in the Courts of Cambodia, ECCC, was finally established in 2006, decades after the crimes had been committed. Pol Pot himself never faced trial, having died in 1998, but other high-ranking Khmer Rouge officials, including Kang Guek Eve, Dutch, Nguyen Chia, and Khieu Samphan, were eventually prosecuted for genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. However, many Cambodians felt that justice had come too late, as most of the perpetrators were elderly and had lived freely for decades. Despite these efforts, the wounds inflicted by the Khmer Rouge era continue to shape Cambodia. Survivors still bear the psychological and physical scars of forced labor, starvation, and the loss of loved ones. The younger generation struggles to reconcile with a past that many elders prefer not to speak about. The Killing Fields and Tool Slang Genocide Museum stand today as grim memorials, ensuring that the world does not forget the atrocities committed. Cambodia has made remarkable progress in rebuilding its society, yet the shadows of the past still linger. The Khmer Rouge's radical vision of an agrarian utopia led to one of the worst genocides in human history, a stark warning of the dangers of unchecked power and extremist ideology. As the nation continues to heal, its people carry a solemn promise: never again.